The night my daughter asked me to sign away my house, she smiled the same way she did when she was a little girl hiding a broken vase behind her back. Too wide, too rehearsed, as if warmth alone could erase intent. I remember the exact sound the pen made when she placed it on the glass table. A soft click. Polite. Final. I did not sign it, but I didn't say no either. That hesitation changed everything. My name is Margaret Holloway. I am 63 years old, widowed, and until recently, I believed that loyalty earned quietly would be returned the same way. I was wrong. It was late October in coastal Connecticut. The leaves had already surrendered their color, clinging to the ground in wet piles along the driveway of the colonial home my husband and I built almost 4 decades ago. The house still smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish, the same scent that lingered the morning he died. I had never repainted his study. I never moved his chair. That night, my daughter Claire arrived unannounced with her husband Daniel. They brought wine I didn't like and compliments I didn't trust. "You look tired, Mom," Claire said, kissing my cheek. Her eyes scanned the living room, the shelves, the artwork. Inventory, not concern. Daniel lingered near the window, hands in his pockets, avoiding my gaze. He always did when something was already decided. They waited until after dinner. Claire pulled a folder from her bag. Thick, legal, neat. She slid it across the table between the teacups and the remains of apple tart. "It's just a formality," she said lightly. "Estate planning. You know how these things are." I did know. I had sat beside my husband Robert in a lawyer's office years earlier, listening to him insist that everything be protected, that nothing be rushed, that kindness never be mistaken for consent. The words were clinical. Trust amendment, property transfer, immediate effect. My home, reassigned to a holding entity Daniel's company controlled. Claire listed as beneficiary. I would retain residency. Temporary. "You'd still live here," she said quickly. "Of course, nothing would change." Except everything. The mini-hook came when I reached the last page. My name was already typed. The signature line waited. Claire sighed, as if I were being difficult on purpose. "We didn't want to stress you. You've been through enough." Daniel finally spoke. "This is just smarter, Margaret. If something happened, probate would be a nightmare. We're protecting you." Protecting me by excluding me. I closed the folder and placed my hand over it. My pulse was steady. That surprised me. "I'll think about it," I said. Claire's smile flickered. A fraction too long. A fraction too tight. "We really need it signed soon," she replied. "Before Thanksgiving. The lawyer's schedule is tight." That was the open loop I didn't understand yet. Why the urgency? Why now? They left shortly after, wine untouched, hugs brief. I stood at the window and watched their car disappear, my reflection staring back at me in the dark glass. Older. Quieter. Not broken. That night, I slept poorly. Sometime before dawn, I woke with the unmistakable sensation of being erased. And that was when I decided I would listen instead of react. Because people who assume you are powerless often forget how much you can hear when you stop speaking. I didn't call Claire the next morning. That alone was unusual enough to make her nervous. She texted twice by noon. I let both messages sit unread while I made coffee and watched the fog lift from the yard. Silence has weight when people are used to access. Instead of calling my daughter, I called Evelyn Marks. Evelyn was 71, sharp as glass, and had been Robert's attorney long before she was mine. She had retired officially, but retirement had never slowed her mind. When I told her I needed to talk, she said only one thing: bring everything. Her office was above a bookstore in New Haven, the kind that still smelled like paper and dust. She listened without interrupting as I laid the folder on her desk and explained the dinner, the tone, the urgency. She read the documents twice. Then she looked at me over her glasses. "They're trying to rush you because something else is already in motion," she said. My stomach tightened. What kind of something? Evelyn tapped the page. "This structure isn't about probate. It's about leverage. Once you sign, control shifts immediately. You become a resident, not an owner." The word resident echoed like an eviction notice. "But here's the interesting part," she continued. They're assuming you haven't reviewed your existing will. I hadn't, not recently. It sat untouched in my safe since Robert's death. Evelyn smiled then, not kindly, precisely. Your husband was thorough, she said, painfully so. She pulled a file from her cabinet. Thick, older, sealed. Robert had placed the house in a layered trust years ago. Claire would inherit eventually, yes, but only under specific conditions. Conditions tied to timelines, behavior, and marital status. Most importantly, any attempt to transfer ownership without my explicit, informed consent triggered a review clause, one that froze all assets pending evaluation by a third party. A judge. They didn't know, I whispered. They assumed, Evelyn corrected. Which tells me they didn't consult counsel. Or they did and didn't like what they heard. The mini-hook came when Evelyn added quietly, "There's also a codicil, one you probably never read." She slid a single page toward me. Robert's handwriting filled the margin. If Margaret is pressured, coerced, or misled regarding the property, she is to retain full control indefinitely. No appeal. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not grief. Recognition. Robert had known. Or at least, he had feared this version of love. "So what do?" I asked. Evelyn leaned back. Nothing. Yet. That afternoon, Claire called. Her voice was sweet, strained at the edges. "Did you get a chance to look at the paperwork again, Mom?" "I did," I replied. "I'm not ready." A pause. Then, sharper. "We're just trying to help." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm taking my time." She hung up shortly after. No goodbye. That evening, I checked my email and found a calendar invite I hadn't accepted. Thanksgiving dinner at Claire's house. Guest list finalized. Lawyer attending. That was when I understood. This wasn't just family drama. It was a coordinated move, and I was no longer confused. I was preparing. If this story resonated with you, stay with me. The next chapters reveal how silence turns into strategy, and how betrayal teaches patience better than love ever did. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. They weren't inviting me to dinner. They were staging an intervention. Claire's house sat on a manicured street in Westport, all white siding and curated wreaths. The kind of place meant to signal stability, success, control. When I pulled into the driveway, Daniel's car was already there, along with one I didn't recognize. A rental, maybe, or a lawyer's. I carried nothing with me. No documents, no purse large enough to suggest preparation. I wanted them to believe I was exactly what they needed me to be, unarmed. Inside, the house buzzed with forced warmth. Claire moved too quickly, laughing a half-second late at her own jokes. Daniel poured wine without asking, and seated at the far end of the dining table was a man in a charcoal suit, his napkin folded with surgical precision. "Mom," Claire said brightly, "this is Thomas Green. He's been helping us with planning." Planning. Not advising, not counseling. Helping. Thomas stood and shook my hand. His grip was firm, his smile professional. He had already decided who I was. Dinner was a performance. Turkey carved with ceremony. Stories from Claire about work, carefully edited. Daniel chimed in only when prompted. I listened. I smiled. I asked polite questions. Halfway through dessert, Claire set her fork down. "Mom," she said softly, "we wanted to talk while we're all together." There it was. Thomas leaned forward slightly. Daniel's jaw tightened. Claire continued. "We're worried about you. About the stress you've been under since Dad died." My chest ached at the casual invocation of Robert's name, used like a lever. "You've been isolated," Daniel added. "It's not healthy." I dabbed my mouth with my napkin. "I see." Thomas cleared his throat. "Mrs. Holloway, sometimes transitions are easier when support systems step in early, before decisions become overwhelming." "And what decisions would those be?" I asked. Claire reached for the folder, the same one, slightly thicker now. "This," she said. "We just want to finalize things. Tonight." I looked around the table. 3 sets of eyes, all waiting. The mini-hook came when Thomas added, "Of course, if you're unwilling, we may need to explore other options." "Other options," I repeated. "Capacity evaluations," he said gently. "Guardianship. Temporary, of course." There it was. The threat dressed as concern. I felt a flicker of anger then. sharp and bright. But I kept my voice even. "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said. Claire's face hardened. "Mom, please don't do this." "Do what?" "Make this harder than it needs to be." I stood slowly. The room seemed to tilt, just slightly. "I'm grateful for dinner," I said, "but I think I'll go home now." Daniel stood abruptly. "You're being unreasonable." I looked at him for the first time all evening. "No," I said. "I'm being deliberate." I walked out without another word. I did not look back. That night, my phone rang 3 times. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened Robert's safe and read every page I had avoided for years. Notes, addendums, safeguards. He had not trusted Claire with impatience, and he had trusted me with time. When I finally slept, I dreamed of doors closing quietly and opening somewhere else. The petition arrived 2 weeks later. Not by mail, by courier. Heavy paper, official seal. Claire wasn't subtle anymore. She was requesting a formal capacity review. I stared at the document at my kitchen table, sunlight pooling beside it like nothing in the world had changed. According to the petition, I was forgetful, isolated, at risk. My daughter, acting out of love, sought temporary authority over my financial and residential decisions. Temporary authority. I felt something settle deep in my bones then. Not fear, not sadness, resolve. I called Evelyn immediately. "They filed," I said. "I expected they would," she replied calmly. "We're ready." Within hours, motions were filed in response. Objections, counterclaims, documentation of my medical history, my independence, my financial literacy, and something else. Evelyn requested discovery. Emails, texts, communications between Claire, Daniel, and Thomas Green. They tried to block it, claimed privacy, claimed irrelevance. The judge disagreed. The mini-hook came when Evelyn called me late one evening, her voice low. "You need to hear this," she said. She read from an email sent by Thomas to Daniel, dated 3 months earlier. "Once we establish diminished capacity, asset consolidation becomes straightforward. Margaret's resistance is expected, but manageable." Manageable. Another message followed. "If she delays signing, escalate concern narrative. Family unity angle works best around holidays." I closed my eyes. This wasn't worry. This was strategy. The hearing was scheduled for mid-January. In the meantime, Claire stopped calling altogether. Daniel sent one text. "This doesn't have to get ugly." I didn't respond. The day of the hearing, I wore a navy coat Robert loved and walked into the courtroom with my head high. Claire sat across from me, pale, rigid. Thomas whispered in her ear. When it was my turn to speak, I stood without notes. "I am here because my daughter believes silence means incapacity," I said. "I am here because she mistook patience for weakness." The judge listened closely. Then Evelyn presented the trust documents, the codicil, the emails. The room changed. Thomas's face drained of color. Claire's composure cracked. The judge recessed early. As we stood to leave, Claire hissed, "You didn't have to do this." I met her eyes. "Neither did you." Outside, the winter air was sharp and clean. I breathed deeply. This wasn't the climax, but the escalation had begun, and the next move would decide everything. The first article appeared 3 days after the hearing, not on the front page, not even local news. It lived quietly on a legal industry blog, the kind no one reads unless they're looking for leverage. Westport family guardianship case raises questions about elder autonomy. My name wasn't mentioned. Claire's wasn't either. But the facts were unmistakable. Someone had leaked it. I didn't need proof to know who. Claire had always believed that pressure worked best when it came from the outside. Social gravity, whispered judgment. She was counting on embarrassment to do what law could not. Instead, it backfired. Evelyn called me early that morning. "They're nervous," she said. "Thomas especially." "Why him?" I asked. "Because discovery didn't stop with emails." She paused deliberately. "We pulled billing records. His firm invoiced Daniel's company for advisory services related to asset consolidation tied to your trust. That's a conflict." My fingers tightened around the mug. "And," Evelyn continued, "there's evidence those services were rendered before you were ever approached. So the plan existed before the concern, before the dinner. Before the smiles, the mini hook arrived when Evelyn added quietly, "We're filing a motion to disqualify Thomas as counsel." That motion landed like a grenade. Within 48 hours, Thomas withdrew from the case, citing professional reasons. Claire scrambled. Daniel hired a new attorney, a woman named Melissa Crane, with a reputation for aggression. Melissa's first move was direct. She requested mediation. "Good faith resolution," the letter read, "to preserve family harmony." I laughed when I read it. Out loud. Alone. We agreed anyway. The mediation room was beige and windowless, designed to dull emotion. Claire sat across from me, hands folded, eyes red, but dry. Daniel avoided looking at either of us. Melissa spoke first. Long sentences, legal cushioning, offers framed as generosity. Claire would step back from the guardianship petition. I would sign a revised trust amendment granting Daniel's company limited management authority. The house would remain in my name, but decisions would be shared. Shared. Again, when it was my turn, I didn't look at Melissa. I looked at my daughter. "You planned this before you ever spoke to me," I said. "You documented concern you hadn't expressed. You hired counsel to manage resistance you hadn't encountered." Claire's voice trembled. "I was afraid." "Of what?" I asked. She swallowed. "That you'd say no." Silence filled the room. I leaned back in my chair. "I am saying no." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "This is insane. You're tearing the family apart." I met his gaze. "No. I'm refusing to be quietly dismantled." The mediator cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a break." I stood. "There's nothing left to discuss." As I left, Claire called after me. "If you do this," she said, "there will be consequences." I turned slowly. "There already are," I replied. That evening, I received an anonymous envelope. Inside were copies of internal emails from Daniel's company, discussions about leveraging real estate holdings for short-term liquidity. My house listed by address. Estimated value highlighted. They weren't planning to protect me. They were planning to use me. I didn't confront Claire with the emails. I didn't need to. Evelyn advised patience, precision. We verified the documents, traced sources, confirmed authenticity. They were real. Daniel's company was overextended, cash-strapped. My house wasn't sentimental to them. It was collateral. The next escalation came from an unexpected place. Claire's former colleague, a woman named Rachel I barely remembered from a holiday party years earlier, requested a meeting. She showed up at my door with shaking hands and eyes full of something close to shame. "I shouldn't be here," she said, "but I can't pretend anymore." Over tea, she told me everything. Claire had been demoted quietly 6 months earlier. Not fired, repositioned. Her authority reduced, her reputation bruised. The guardianship, the trust, the urgency, all of it stemmed from that moment. She needed a win, Rachel said. Something to prove control. Control. I nodded slowly. Rachel slid a flash drive across the table. "These are internal performance reviews," she said. "And a complaint." "What kind of complaint?" Rachel hesitated. "Conflict of interest. Undisclosed personal gain." The mini hook hit hard. Claire hadn't just overreached with me. She'd done it everywhere. Evelyn's eyes lit up when she reviewed the files. "This changes the posture entirely," she said. "We're no longer defending. We're countering." The filing was surgical. Petition to dismiss guardianship. Motion for sanctions. Notice of intent to pursue elder coercion claims. And quietly, a referral to the State Ethics Board regarding Claire's professional conduct. When Claire was served, she called me for the first time in months. Her voice was thin, stripped of confidence. "You're ruining me," she said. I closed my eyes. "No," I replied. "I'm refusing to disappear for your convenience." She hung up without another word. 2 days later, the Ethics Board opened a formal review. Daniel's company stock dipped. And for the first time since Robert died, I felt something close to peace. Not because I was winning, but because I had stopped losing myself to silence. The climax was coming, and this time, I would not be asked to sign anything to make it easier for them. The day Claire lost her job, she didn't tell me. I found out the way women my age often do now. Quietly, indirectly. From a line buried halfway down a business newsletter forwarded by someone who thought I already knew. Senior director resigns amid internal ethics review. Resigns. Not terminated. Not removed. A word chosen to preserve dignity that had already evaporated. I read the sentence twice, then folded the paper and placed it beside my coffee cup. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. A year earlier, this would have gutted me. Now, it felt like confirmation. An hour later, Daniel called. Not Claire. Daniel. His voice was clipped, controlled, stripped of the confidence he once wore like a tailored suit. "We need to talk," he said. "No," I replied. "You need to listen." There was a pause. Then, reluctantly, "Fine." I told him I had seen the emails, that I understood the pressure his company was under, that I knew exactly why my house mattered to him. "You had no right," he snapped. "You're right," I said calmly. "I had every right." That shut him up. Then I delivered the sentence I had practiced quietly for weeks. "I am filing a civil claim for attempted elder coercion and financial exploitation." He laughed, sharp and hollow. "You don't have a case." "I don't need one yet," I said. "I need discovery." Silence. "You'll destroy Claire," he said finally. "I thought of my daughter as a child, asleep in the back seat after long drives, trusting me completely." "You did that," I replied, "when you taught her that control mattered more than consent." He hung up. 2 days later, Claire showed up at my house. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. Her coat hung loosely on her shoulders, as if she'd borrowed it from someone else's life. She didn't come inside at first. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the railing Robert had built. "You were never supposed to fight back," she said quietly. That was the moment that broke something final between us. "I wasn't supposed to need to," I replied. She finally looked at me then. Really looked. "I did everything right," she said. "I followed the rules. I planned. I protected." "You manipulated," I said. "And when it didn't work, you escalated." Her voice cracked. "I was afraid." "So was I answered. "But I didn't try to erase you." She stepped inside then. The house felt tighter with her in it, like memory itself was watching. "If you go through with this," she said, "I'll lose everything." I held her gaze. "You already have." She left without another word. That night, I slept dreamlessly. And when I woke, the next phase had already begun. The civil filing landed harder than I expected. Not legally, strategically. Once the complaint became public record, everything shifted. Neighbors stopped waving at Daniel. Investors asked questions his company wasn't ready to answer. The ethics review at Claire's firm widened, pulling in other decisions, other patterns. Silence followed her everywhere now. The judge assigned to our case was thorough, methodical, the kind who didn't rush and didn't bluff. During the preliminary hearing, she listened more than she spoke. When she finally addressed Claire directly, her tone was neutral. "Ms. Holloway," she said, "your actions suggest a sustained attempt to control assets not legally yours." Claire flinched. "This court will not tolerate the misuse of familial relationships for financial leverage." That sentence echoed. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Claire kept her head down. Daniel vanished into a waiting car. I walked past them all. For the first time, no one asked me how I felt. They asked me why. I answered honestly. Because silence teaches people they can keep going. The mini-hook came a week later. Evelyn called me late, her voice low but steady. "We've uncovered something else," she said. "What kind of something?" I asked. "A secondary trust," she replied, "created by Robert. One none of us noticed because it wasn't attached to the house." My breath caught. "What is it?" I whispered. "A contingency fund," Evelyn said. "Activated only if someone tried to challenge your autonomy." I closed my eyes. Robert's foresight was a presence in the room then. Not comforting, protective. The fund wasn't small. It wasn't symbolic. It was enough to cover legal fees indefinitely. Enough to support independent oversight. Enough to ensure I would never be pressured into settling out of fear. "Claire doesn't know about it," Evelyn added. I smiled faintly. "She doesn't need to." That night, I stood in the study and ran my fingers over the desk Robert built. I thought about how easily women like me are expected to fade, to soften, to step aside quietly so others can move forward faster. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. And the final chapters wouldn't be about punishment. They would be about consequence. And what happens when the person you tried to control refuses to disappear. The settlement offer arrived the morning after Christmas. No card, no greeting. Just an envelope slid under my door by a courier who didn't meet my eyes. Daniel's company letterhead, a tone that tried to sound reasonable. They wanted this over. The offer was generous by any external measure. Cash compensation, a formal apology drafted by counsel, a quiet withdrawal of all claims. In return, I would drop the civil suit and agree to a confidentiality clause that would seal everything permanently. Family harmony, the letter said. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope open, snow falling steadily outside, the world muffled and pale. For a moment, I imagined how easy it would be to say yes, how tired I was, how tempting it felt to rest. Then I turned the page. There it was, buried halfway down, disguised as standard language, a non-disparagement clause that extended to future statements by third parties, which meant if someone else spoke, and I didn't actively refute it, I would be in breach. Silence. Again. Contractual this time. I called Evelyn. They want me to disappear, I said. They want you to consent to erasure, she replied. There's a difference. I told her to reject it, without counter. An hour later, my phone rang. Claire. I hadn't heard her voice since the porch. It sounded older now, thinner. Please, she said. No greeting, no pretense, just stop. I closed my eyes and listened to her breathe on the other end of the line. Uneven, uncontrolled. You're not asking me to stop, I said. You're asking me to lie still. I've lost my job, she said. Daniel's company is bleeding. People look at me like I'm toxic. I pictured her in rooms where conversations fell quiet when she entered. I knew that feeling now, too. I didn't do this to you, I said. I refused to absorb it. There was a long pause. Then she said the one thing I hadn't expected. I don't know who I am without winning. That landed hard. You could have asked me, I said softly. For help? For time? For trust? I didn't think you'd survive losing control, she replied. The cruelty of that assumption took my breath for a second. Then it passed. You never saw me, I said. You saw a resource. She began to cry. Real crying. The kind without rhythm or strategy. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I answered. But I'm not trading my voice for your comfort. She hung up. 2 days later, Daniel's company filed for restructuring. Not bankruptcy, yet. But the headlines used words like unstable and overextended. The case moved quickly after that. Depositions, financial disclosures, testimony from Rachel, emails laid bare in sterile conference rooms where intention mattered less than evidence. The mini-hook came when Melissa Crane, their aggressive attorney, requested a private sidebar with Evelyn. She wants to talk, Evelyn said later, without clients. When lawyers want to speak without witnesses, something is cracking. Melissa was blunt. Your client has leverage, she said. More than she knows. Evelyn smiled. She knows. Melissa sighed. Then let me be clear. If this proceeds to trial, it won't just be ugly. It will be definitive. I thought of Robert's handwriting, his quiet preparation, his faith in time. Then let it be definitive, I said. That night, alone in the house, I packed away the last of his winter coats. I didn't cry. I didn't rush. I was done mistaking endurance for peace. And the courtroom would soon decide whether truth still mattered when it made people uncomfortable. The trial began on a Monday. Cold, bright, unforgiving. I arrived early and took my seat before anyone else entered. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and paper. Order. Finality. I placed my hands flat on the table and breathed slowly, counting the seconds the way Evelyn had taught me. When Claire walked in, she didn't look at me. Daniel did, briefly, then looked away. Opening statements were clean, controlled. Their side framed concern, protection, love misinterpreted, mistakes made with good intentions. Evelyn didn't argue that. She reframed it. This case, she said calmly, is not about family conflict. It is about consent. About what happens when fear dresses itself as care and uses proximity to bypass permission. I watched the judge's eyes. Claire took the stand on the second day. She spoke carefully at first, about her worries, about my isolation, about how she believed she was acting responsibly. Then Evelyn asked her about the timing, the emails, the demotion, the cash flow issues at Daniel's company. Claire faltered. "Did you believe your mother's property could stabilize your family's finances?" Evelyn asked. Silence. "Answer the question," the judge said. "Yes," Claire whispered. The room shifted. Then came the guardianship petition. "Did you consult a medical professional before filing?" Evelyn asked. "No." "Did you observe cognitive decline?" "No." "Then on what basis did you claim diminished capacity?" Claire's voice shook. "I thought if I didn't act fast, I'd lose control." There it was. Not love. Not fear for me. Fear of losing control. When it was my turn, I stood without notes. I spoke about the sound of the pen, the folder on the table, the way my life was being reorganized without me. I spoke about silence, about how women my age are praised for it, expected to age quietly into usefulness. "I am not fragile," I said. "I am not confused. I am not an obstacle to be managed." The judge listened without interruption. The ruling came 3 days later. The court found in my favor on all counts: attempted elder coercion, financial exploitation, abuse of process, damages awarded, injunctive relief granted. Claire and Daniel barred from managing or influencing my assets indefinitely. But the most important sentence came last. The court recognizes the plaintiff's autonomy as intact and ongoing. Autonomy. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. I answered none. Claire stood off to the side, alone, smaller than ever. When our eyes met, there was no anger left in hers, only understanding. That night, I returned home and sat in Robert's chair for the first time since he died. It creaked beneath me, familiar and imperfect. I didn't feel victorious. I felt reclaimed. The final chapters would not be about what I took back. They would be about what I chose to build in the space where silence used to live. And that choice, finally, was mine alone. After the ruling, the house felt unfamiliar in a new way. Not empty, exposed. For weeks, my days had been shaped by filings, hearings, strategy calls, and late nights rereading documents until the words blurred. When all of that stopped, I was left alone with the quiet I had fought so hard to protect. Claire did not contact me. Daniel did, once, through counsel, to arrange the logistics of compliance. His tone was formal, distant, already looking for an exit from the wreckage of his own ambition. I declined to speak with him directly. Instead, I focused on what remained. I met with Evelyn again, not as a client in crisis, but as a woman deciding what came next. We reviewed the secondary trust Robert had created, the one meant to ensure independence rather than inheritance. For the first time, I understood its true purpose. It wasn't a shield, it was an invitation. You could sell, Evelyn said. Downsize, travel, start fresh. I shook my head. This house is not a prize. It's a witness. So I stayed, but I didn't stay still. I began volunteering at a legal clinic for older women, quietly at first, sitting in on consultations, listening to stories that sounded painfully familiar. Daughters, sons, nephews, concern that felt suspiciously like control. Silence mistaken for consent. One woman gripped my hand after her appointment and whispered, "I thought it was just me." It never is. Word spread slowly. I didn't give interviews. I didn't speak publicly about Claire. I spoke about process, about rights, about questions worth asking before you sign anything someone places in front of you, with a smile. And then, one afternoon in early spring, Claire wrote to me. Not a text, not a call, a letter. Her handwriting was tight, careful, like someone afraid of saying too much. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't explain herself. She wrote instead about therapy, about learning how fear had shaped her choices, about how she had built her life around control because she didn't know how to live without it. I read it twice. Then I placed it in the drawer with Robert's papers. I wasn't ready to answer, not because I was angry, but because reconciliation, like silence, can be used too quickly to avoid accountability. The mini-hook came weeks later, when Evelyn called with unexpected news. "Daniel's company is being acquired," she said. "At a loss. He's out." I closed my eyes. The consequences were continuing, even without my involvement. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, listening to the familiar creak of wood beneath my feet. I realized something then. Revenge hadn't been the point. Clarity was. And clarity, once earned, doesn't fade. The first time Claire came back to the house, it was summer. She called ahead, asked, waited. That alone told me something had changed. She stood at the end of the driveway when I opened the door, hands clasped, shoulders tense. Older than her years now, quieter. "I won't come in if you don't want me to," she said. I studied her for a long moment. Not as a mother measuring her child, but as a woman assessing another adult who had finally stopped pretending. "You can come in," I said. "But this is a conversation, not a reset." She nodded. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where so many assumptions had been made without me. The light was different now, softer, honest. She spoke first. "I thought power meant security," she said. "I thought if I controlled outcomes, nothing could fall apart. And when it did," I asked. She swallowed. "I blamed you for surviving it." That was the most truthful thing she had ever said to me. "I'm not asking you to trust me," she continued. "I'm asking you to see me trying." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I told her about the women at the clinic, about the stories I heard, about how easily love can be twisted into leverage when silence is expected. She listened. Really listened. "I don't know if we'll ever be what we were," she said quietly. "I don't want what we were," I replied. "I want something honest." We talked for hours, not about money, not about property, about boundaries, about fear, about how easily inheritance becomes entitlement when grief is still raw. When she left, she didn't hug me. She thanked me. That felt right. In the months that followed, my life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known before. I spoke when I needed to. I rested when I wanted to. I stopped explaining myself to people who benefited from my quiet. On the anniversary of Robert's death, I took his diary from the drawer and read the last line again. "Protect your voice, even when it trembles." I closed the book and smiled. If you're listening to this story and see yourself in it, know this. Revenge isn't always loud. Justice isn't always public. And power doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like refusing to disappear. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever been excluded, manipulated, or told your silence was kindness, then I invite you to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe. Because these stories don't end with youth. They begin when we finally decide our lives still belong to us.